Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. Today in Job chapter 13, we see Job getting pretty flustered with his friends. His friends were there with Job during his most miserable days, and where his friends should have been people who were coming to him with comforting words, encouraging words, and just being there with him. Instead, they are accusing him of sin, and they're trying to blame his bad circumstances on some type of sin and trying to convince him to repent of his sin so that God would restore him back to what he had before. And Job continually has to defend himself. And it gets to a point in chapter 13 that he calls them worthless physicians. This is found in verse 4 where it says, "But you smear with lies, you are all worthless physicians." Think about what a physician is supposed to do. A physician or a doctor is supposed to bring healing. When a person is wounded, they bind them up and bring healing to them so that they can be restored. But with Job's friends, when it came to his emotional turmoil and his spiritual turmoil, they were not binding up and healing. They were actually tearing at the wound more and making Job feel even more miserable. And this is a shame because, a lot of times you see that with Christians. We as Christians, we ought to be the best comforters that the world knows. If you think about it, we as Christians, we have a perspective on life, one that is true. It's a true perspective, but also it's a very hopeful perspective on life. And it ought to be that we are the best physicians when a person is going through some type of tragedy, some type of difficulty. When we come to them, they ought to be receiving life from us and healing by our presence there with them and by the words that we speak. But a lot of times, Christians make the worst physicians. Sometimes we come to people and maybe we do the exact same thing that Job's friends do, that we maybe try to blame it on some sin in their life is why they're going through what they're going through. Or we might come up with these trite sayings, these cliches that to a person who's really wounded and hurting deep within, they are worthless at the best and can even hurt worse, make the hurt worse at the worst. So we want to be people who bring healing to people, not wounding them more. And one way that we can do this is by following what Job says in the very next verse. In verse 5, he says, "Oh, that you would be completely silent, and that would become your wisdom." He says, if you just be silent, that would be more helpful than what you're doing right now. And this is surprising because at the beginning, when they sat down with Job in his misery, that's exactly what they did. If you go back to chapter 2, in verse 13, it says, "Then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great." And so at the beginning, that's exactly what they did. For a full week, for 7 days and 7 nights, they just sat with him. Didn't even speak a word. But all that has changed now, and they've actually begun to injure him. Well, sometimes we need to just be quiet. Sometimes people's hurt are too deep for words, and for us to try to speak to them and try to solve their problem, to try to give them all the answers, to try to throw a lot of verses at them. Um, some people might appreciate that, but a lot of times it's just more helpful to just be quiet, just to be there for them, to show support for them. And that a lot of times is done without even speaking a word. And so if we really want to help those who are hurting, just be there for them. Typically, if a person wants answers, or if a person is seeking wisdom through their difficulty, and they know that you're a Christian and they know where you're coming from, usually they'll ask. And usually they'll be the one to bring it up. But it's always important to let them be in control of the situation, and kind of follow their lead on whether to speak, whether to give advice, whether to impart wisdom, if we have some type of wisdom to share with them. But let them take the lead, because they're the ones that's hurting. And we're just there to pick them up, to be there for them, to support them, and to encourage them in any way that we possibly can. So let's just think about that today, whether you know someone who's hurting right now or in the future. You have maybe a friend or a relative or someone that you come in contact with who's hurting. Let's remember this advice by Job. If anyone knows how or knows about suffering and about people responding to that suffering, it would have been Job. And so we would be wise to follow his advice. Well, I thank you guys for listening in today. I love you guys. Hope you guys have a great day. God bless.